So y'all suck up all the heat you can in here, because we getting ready to march. One of the things that Dr. King was first and foremost was a minister, a believer, and an exponent of faith against all odds. You can't sever from him what he was to fit your agenda. We've had a strong ministers division in NAN. Our 25th anniversary is in April. We're going to have the biggest convention you've ever seen in civil rights. I believe in continuity of leadership. Young man came to New York. We met. He has built an even stronger church than he found. One of the fastest growing churches in this country. And he's been in National Action Network Ministers Division, helping us all over the country. He went with me to Washington this morning for our national breakfast of NAN with the Attorney General, and we flew back together. And he has another speaking engagement, but I want us to hear, because this goes from generation to generation. And it starts from our young, like Dasani, all the way to our next generation of Kirsten, Foy, and Dominique, then to the generation that he is in that I will bring, then my generation, then our elders, like Michael Hardy, and some of those that are close to that river, where you never go. May we hear from the senior pastor of 1 Corinthian Baptist Church, Reverend Michael Walrock.
Good afternoon, National Action Network. We have many speakers, and so I'll be very brief. Yesterday, I had the pleasure of speaking at a MLK event at the Apollo Theater. And after the Apollo Theater event, I got a text message from a young woman who's an activist in this city. And she shared with me in the text message how she really thoroughly enjoyed the comments I made. And then she said something. She said, and I shared this with Reverend Sharpton, she said she kind of felt uncomfortable when I started talking about Jesus at a King event. And it makes me wonder, because when I realize what often happens on this day, beyond a lot of lip service from some, what happens on this day beyond the memorialization of Dr. King is that we have a tendency to decontextualize Dr. King. Dr. King, as many will call him, we would have to say Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. You cannot, as Reverend Sharpton said, separate Dr. King from the faith that gave him the strength, the foresight, and the vision to stand boldly. When Dr. King stood boldly, he did that. I'll be brief, but let me say this. He preached a sermon one time called Guidelines for a Constructive Church. And in that sermon, he lifted this line that I know is familiar to many of us. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. For he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim that captives will be released, that the blind will see, that the oppressed will be set free, that this is the year of the Lord's favor. The only way that Dr. King was able to do what he did was because the Spirit of the Lord was upon him. You cannot put your life on the line, sacrifice family, life, livelihood for the sake of a cause you believe in unless the Spirit of the Lord is upon you. For those of us today who would want to be activists, who lead spiritless movements, problem may be that we need to remember, the only way you can stand for justice when people begin to sling arrows your direction is when the Spirit of the Lord is upon you. The only way we can stand for justice today is if we trust that the Spirit of the Lord is upon us. And so when people ask you, why do we fight for equity in education, you let them know, because the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. When people want to know, why do you march against mass incarceration, you tell them, because the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. When people want to know, why do you fight against the Supreme Court and their injustice decisions, you tell them, because the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. And if anybody want to know why you will live in spite of all that will come against us in our fight for freedom, justice, and equality, you tell them proudly, quietly, sometimes aggressively, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me.
All right, let me go to our next speaker. Let us hear now from the Congresswoman, Carolyn Maloney. Give her a hand.
Thank you, Reverend Sharpton, and it's a thrill to be here with the National Action Network on Martin Luther King's birthday. And because of his words and his work, every day is King's birthday in America with the change that he brought. Every day is his birthday. I used to talk to my mother, and we'd have a talk about who was the greatest American. And she would argue FDR, and I would argue Martin Luther King. When you think about it, he wasn't elected. He didn't have some big corporate job. He wasn't rich. He was a minister with the Spirit of the Lord, and he literally changed this country fundamentally and deeply more than any other American that had the privilege to live here. And every year, I go back to Selma, Alabama. My roommate was the only woman elected from Alabama. It hadn't changed their politics that much. And it was inspiring, some of the most inspiring times, to talk to the people who worked with Dr. Martin Luther King. And when we went back this last year for the 50th anniversary, we had an African-American president. The district attorney for America was Eric Holder, now Loretta Lynch, from New York. And there was massive change. But if you looked at the political change, it had happened. But the economic change has not, because Selma is still a very poor city for many of the people that live there. So if Dr. Martin Luther King were here today, he'd be giving the same speech, very similar to the same speech he gave in Tennessee the night he was killed, on economic justice, economic opportunity, the American dream, and listen carefully to those candidates. We've got a good governor and a good mayor. They've done what they can for minimum wage, but we need a federal minimum wage of $15, and don't you even think about voting for anyone who doesn't have that in their platform for president. And I must say that I was very moved by Reverend Sharpton's mention of the mothers that lost their loved ones to guns. And Dr. King would say to you, how crazy can you be as a nation not to pass sensible gun laws? There is only one area where we've passed a law in Congress that says you can't even study gun safety. I say there is no issue that is so controversial that it can't be debated, discussed, and studied. We study car safety, why can't we study gun safety? And I have a bill in there to fund gun safety, to do the background checks, to put gun liability, to take stark steps to make our streets and our people safe. We're losing 80 people a day to senseless guns in America. So God bless America, God bless Dr. Martin Luther King, and God bless all of us who get out there and work for his dream every single day. Every day is his birthday. We thank you, Dr. Martin Luther King, for what you gave this great nation. Thank you and God bless.
Give her a hand. I thank the Congresswoman that she stayed within the time. A lot of folks get confused with time. I went to speak somewhere, and I wasn't like Congressman Maloney. I spoke over time. They kept holding up the sign, 2 minutes, and I thought they were letting me know the folk had applauded me for 2 minutes. So I want y'all to know that is not an applause sign. That means sit down sign. Because we gonna march at 3. There are already many outside lining up, and they're cold. So you that want to talk longer than the 3 minutes, you can talk all the way down 7th Avenue. Long as you want. I promise you, I won't say a word. Before I bring our state controller and public advocate and others, I want us to know what this is all about. I want us to hear from the president of Youth Move Chapter of National Action Network here in Harlem. He's 12 years old, Brother Josiane Morris.
Good morning, National Action Network family. First off, happy Martin Luther King Day. As we stop today to honor and celebrate the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, we can't help but reflect on his legacy. Dr. King's legacy was one of nonviolence as he protested and fought for justice and equality for people of color. Dr. King was a Baptist minister, a humanitarian, an activist, and a leader of the African American Civil Rights Movement. In his August 28, 1963 I Have a Dream speech, he eloquently expressed his desire to see equality and justice become a reality for people of color. Youth have been a crucial part of the civil rights movement. They have been involved in many of the historic events that have changed our country and our world. There were many children that marched alongside Dr. King. Linda Blackman Lowry, at age 15, was the youngest person to march from Selma to Montgomery. There was also the Birmingham Children's Crusade. We all remember the images of them being hosed and police dogs being let loose on them as they attempted to get education equality. Similar to the youth of Dr. King's day and the Civil Rights era, the youth of National Action Network through the Huddle and Youth Move have engaged in the fights for equality and justice. Under the guidance and mentorship of Reverend Al Sharpton, we are actively engaged in the fight. We are in the forefront of debates, actions, protests, and marches for educational equality, dismantling the cradle-to-prison pipeline, Black Lives Matter, economic equality, fair wages, ban the box, and gun violence in our own communities. Inspired by the trailblazers that lived and the trailblazers that still live, we fight as one. On April 4th, 1968, Dr. King made the ultimate sacrifice, and yet another of his selfless fights to ensure equality for the disenfranchised and marginalized. His life was cruelly taken by a bullet meant to silence him. It is said that you become a great person when you have a legacy that outlives you. Dr. King exceeded that expectation. He has left a legacy that will outlive us all. My challenge to my peers, my mentors, and to all in my hearing is that we find a cause worthy to die for. And to be committed to that cause. Have a good day. I hope you're marching with us at 3 o'clock.
Give them a hand. I wanted y'all to hear him, and I wanted him to speak. I was his age when Dr. King got killed. And I was youth director to her father, youth director to Reverend Jones in Operation Breadbasket. And I'll sit right there, Jazani, right at the end here. And sit there next to, that's Controller Spring. Tell him, lean over and tell him you're thinking about giving him a primary next year. You're just thinking. We'll talk about it after the march. Just nudge him a little bit. Let us hear from the state controller of the state of New York, who has done more to equalize opportunity for management of state monies, as he promised here and as he has continued to do, State Controller Tom DiNapoli.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Reverend Sharpton, Dr. Richardson, National Action Network family, for once again hosting this wonderful celebration of the birthday of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Jasani, I wish I was as together as you are at your age when I was your age. And when I was about your age, Rev and I are about born the same year. It was the year that Dr. King was assassinated. When you hear Jasani, though, it's very clear they may have killed the dreamer, but they did not kill the dream. Very clear. And I thank great mentors to me, like my neighbor, Hazel Dukes, who was fighting on Long Island back then in the 60s and fighting for all of us in New York State as head of the NAACP. Thank you, Hazel, for what you continue to do to be a role model. We've made great strides. There's more work to do to achieve Dr. King's goals of justice and equality and peace. It's an unfinished agenda we all must be dedicated to. In the Controller's Office, we try our best to make improvements. Reverend Sharpton gave me a challenge when I first became Controller. Open up the doors of opportunity for women-owned firms and firms of color to manage pension fund money. Reverend, we're over $9 billion now in MWBEs managing our pension fund dollars, with more to go. February 12th, we're having our next Emerging Manager Conference. We continue to have reports issued that highlight the disparity in our society. We don't talk enough about the health disparities. African Americans in our state have 40% higher rate of incidence of diabetes than the overall population. That's an issue. Double the deaths from asthma among African Americans compared to the rest of the population. We put out studies. We want our policymakers to focus on this. Obviously, the economic agenda, the need to have economic equality. Your march today to ensure we finally have a higher minimum wage in New York State. It is time for us to do that. The last item I want to quickly mention in my 30 seconds to go that we talked about before here, guns. You saw the articles in the paper earlier this month. Gun sales higher than ever. Profits of Smith & Wesson, Strun, Ruger higher than ever. Well, you know something? We made a decision in New York. Doesn't make sense to invest in those companies. We have taken out your New York pension fund dollars. We're not investing with those companies because change is coming. Happy Martin Luther King Day. Here's to more victories this year and beyond.
Tom DiNapoli, give him a hand. Let us now hear from the city controller, who is a member here. He's here on a lot of Saturdays. No stranger here and no stranger to the fight for justice and for the fight for minimum wage. Let's hear from City Controller Scott Stringer.
Thank you, Reverend Sharpton, and what an honor it is to be back here to celebrate this very, very special man, Dr. King. This morning, my 4-year-old came up to me and asked me where I was going and why school was closed. No, really, I have a 4-year-old. I know I look old, but it's okay. I got a 2.5-year-old too. I'm proud of it at 55. All right, let's give it up, 55. Tish has my back, it's okay. I tell you about my 4-year-old because I didn't know what to do. Do you teach at that moment? Tell him what I know. Tell him about that time when I knew Dr. King when I was 8 years old, son, and he died. I didn't know who he was, but my parents did. They put on a record. Remember records? And they put us to sleep and they cried all night. And then Robert F. Kennedy died 2 months later. I want to give this message to my son. Because the only way this is going to work in this country is if we prepare the next soldiers for justice, and we have to start doing it now. I want my little boy to understand what Dasani knows at a young age, what the mothers know because they come back here all the years to tell people that this battle is far from over. That we need to understand that the next battle is the battle, and I believe Dr. King would have been preaching this today, the next battle is the economic battle. I leave you with this, and this is what we're doing in the Comptroller's office with Ruben Diaz and Tish James. Our companies in America, 9% of the corporate boards are African American, 9% of the people on corporate boards. 5% are Latino, very few women. Corporate America is run by male, pale, I hate to say this, stale people who are not creating the economic opportunity in our cities across America. And if we're going to have justice, it's about 15, but it's about company ownership and opportunity at the great tech companies and the great real estate companies. We have to open it up, and that's what Dr. King would have been preaching to us today. Thank you, God bless you, and it's great to be here with Reverend Sharpton.
Yeah, sit over there, Scott. The speaker has arrived taking your seat. You've been unseated. And Jasani, that's good advice the Comptroller gave you. Wait till you're 55 to have children. And you do me a favor, convince Dominique and Ashley that. Wait till they're in their 50s, and I'll hang around to see my grandchildren. And we'll all live happy, long lives. Let us hear from the fighting, fiery Shirley Chisholm of our time, the public advocate of the city of New York, Tish James.
Reverend Sharpton, I want to thank all of my colleagues, and I want to thank all of you for marching. Listen, this weekend we should not reduce Reverend Sharpton to nothing more than platitudes. We should not reduce Reverend Sharpton to a feel-good kind of minister. In his thoughts and in his minds and in his dream was revolutionary. It was militant. And so all of us need to remember that Reverend Sharpton at one point in time was spied on. There was one point in time they thought he was a terrorist of the state. And so we can't come up here and say that Reverend Sharpton was a feel-good kind of individual. Reverend Sharpton talked about revolutionary ideas, and we too got to continue in that vein. And that's why all of you need to join me as we again make sure that little girls who walk into parks with their fathers will not be violated. Their innocence will not be taken away, will not be stolen. We've got to tell young boys that respect goes beyond their mothers, their fathers, and their aunts. It goes on to little girls. They know their names, that they don't know their names. And we've got to talk about gun violence, and we got to divest from companies that engage in the death industry, that cause death in industry to young black boys. And we've got to talk about the violence that we see all too often amongst all of us. And we've got to make sure that we demand justice for these mothers, and that this club is not extended and not expanded anymore. And we've got to talk about economic opportunity in the city of New York and raise the wage and make sure we continue to grow the black middle class. That's what we got to do. We got to stay on it. We got to stay true to his message and his word. We can't just recite little excerpts of his speech. We've got to live the dream, be of the dream, be part of the dream, dream big, dream on, and keep his dream alive.
Tish James. We getting ready to march introduction won't be but a minute. Let us hear now from the Speaker of the New York State Assembly, brother from the Bronx, who's been with us through it all, and we're with and proud of him, Speaker Carl Hastings.
Thank you, as always, for inviting me into the National Action Network House. And for me, as we've been celebrating Dr. King's legacy this weekend, and I've said that we shouldn't just celebrate him on his weekend, we should be celebrating his legacy every single day of the year. And for me, it was special because the day I was elected, later on, my first official act as Speaker, we did a resolution honoring the life and legacy of Dr. King. And even in my speech, I thanked him, because if not for him, many of us who are up here on the stage wouldn't have the opportunity to hold the positions that we do. So how do we handle and honor his legacy? By doing the jobs that we were elected to do. I see all of the people outside talking about the fight for 15. One of the first things we did when I became Speaker was to pass a bill to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Just a couple of weeks after I became Speaker, that's something that we did in the Assembly. How else can we keep moving his legacy along? By putting record investment into education and record investment into higher education so that our young men and women can have the opportunity to go to school. And I'm happy, I know the governor's here, and for us to partner in trying to do, and what our message was when I got elected Speaker was we wanted to put families first. And I'm so happy to see that people are marching for the $15 an hour, because that's something we're going to take up. We believe in the Assembly that if you work 35 to 40 hours a week, you should not have to live in poverty. And that's what we want to see happen this year. So all of you who have friends as Republican senators, tell them we want a $15 an hour minimum wage. And lastly, I'd like to say, I know I got 1 minute, I'm going to stay within my time. I'm a man of few words. I've said many, many times, and I'll say it here again, that my speakership will be in vain if we don't do a top-down review of the criminal justice system. So I want to say thank you. Thank you for your prayers, thank you for your support, and God bless you on Martin Luther King Jr.
From the Borough of Brooklyn, a strong advocate, an attorney who took no prisoners as attorney and has already made us proud as he has stood as now the Kings County District Attorney. Let us hear from the DA from Brooklyn, New York, Ken Thompson.
Opportunity to be here today to honor and pay honor and tribute to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a man who we as a nation owe a tremendous debt. You know, today Dr. King is viewed almost as an American saint. But you know, when he was alive, it was a very different story. In fact, all over the country today, on his national holiday, that Dr. King is going to be limited in many ways to his I Have a Dream speech. But we should teach our children that Dr. King was much more than that. We should teach them the truth, and that is that Dr. King was a great man of enormous courage, who sacrificed his life to make our country a better place for all. And that when he was alive, he was considered a dangerous troublemaker. He was relentlessly harassed by the FBI. He was hated by many and vilified in the media. All because Dr. King had the courage to demand that this country live up to its declaration that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Also, don't ever forget that in his fight to secure equal rights and dignity for us all, Dr. King suffered a great deal on our behalf. He was arrested nearly 30 times, he was stabbed, his house was blown up, he faced imminent death day after day, and he died for all of us on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel, Memphis, Tennessee, that terrible day in April 1968. And we should also never forget that when a year to the day that he was killed, when everyone had abandoned him, Dr. King stood up to the United States government, the greatest military power in the world, and he condemned the Vietnam War as an injustice being committed against poor people in this country and around the world. In that speech at Riverside Church, Dr. King came out and said, there's a time when silence becomes betrayal, and that he can no longer remain silent. And he spoke truth to power. He said, we're taking black men who have been crippled by our society and sending them 8,000 miles away to guarantee liberties in Southeast Asia that they haven't been able to realize in Southwest Georgia, in East Harlem. You see, Dr. King was courageous beyond measure. So the best thing that we can do to support Dr. King and honor him is to go beyond the I Have a Dream speech, to continue to fight for human dignity, for economic and racial equality, for political empowerment, and for social justice. What that means is that we have to stand up and demand a fair criminal justice system here in our country. And we must come together and fight to stop this senseless gun violence that's killing so many of our children. From Sandy Hook to Red Hook, from Brownsville to the south side of Chicago, from the streets of Baltimore to the parishes of New Orleans. We have got to rise up as a nation and demand that we will no longer allow 11,000 Americans to be murdered with guns every year, most of whom are young black men slaughtered in the streets of our cities day after day. Whether that's Tyshawn Lee, a 9-year-old boy who was lured into an alley in Chicago by a gang and executed, or a young man who was just killed outside our high school in Brooklyn the other day. We must do better. We owe it to ourselves. We owe it to our children. We owe it to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
DA from Brooklyn, Ken Thompson. I saw many of our dignitaries come in, but moving fast because we're going to march on time. One thing we do in NAN, we march on time, especially when it's cold. I saw my congressman come in. I have to confess to you, DA Thompson, that I was getting on the shuttle to Washington about 2 years ago, and a lady who was up in age and couldn't seem to see well looked up and said, "Are you Congressman Rangel?" And I started to respond, saying we must all look alike, but I said, "No, I'm not him. I'm Al Sharpton." She says, "Oh, no, I just thought you were him because I saw him speak somewhere, and I was so moved that I wanted to donate to whatever cause that he chose. I was going to give him a check for $10,000. I said, "Well, miss, you know you can write that." Let us hear from the borough president of Bronx County, borough president who stood with us from day one with Amadou Diallo on Wheeler Avenue and has been with us every step of the way, Bronx Borough President Ruben Diaz Jr.
Happy King Day, everyone. So I'll be quick here. Dr. King told us that the moral arc of the universe was long, but it bent towards justice. For us in the Bronx, we feel proud, and we bring the greetings from the Bronx. Because over the last 11 months, we've seen that long arc bend from the 1950s in Alabama all the way to the boogie down Bronx. What do I mean by that? Over the last 11 months in the Bronx and the state of New York, we have seen the first black Bronxite elected Speaker to the New York State Assembly in Clark Hasty. And just this weekend, we were able to inaugurate the first woman of color to district attorney in the history of the state of New York in Darcel Clark. We've been there fighting the good fight with Miss Diallo fighting the good fight against police brutality. When you look at the living wage law of the city of New York, that started in the Bronx when we said no, when Bloomberg wanted to develop the Kingsbridge Armory. Many of you in 1199, many of you in labor stood with us, many of you in NAN stood with us, but there's so much more that needs to happen. When we still see so much injustice being done. Look at the 3.5 million Americans in the island of Puerto Rico and what they're going through. We need the help of everyone. Dr. Sharpton, Reverend Sharpton, was there for us when the Navy was there bombing us. Many of you were there for us, and we thank you for that. But now it is time to tell DC, go and help out those 3.5 million Americans in Puerto Rico. And then last but not least, I just want to say this, I have a minute. Let's not make the innocent mistake of thinking that Dr. King's words are not ageless, that they are not applicable to not only those in the halls of power today in DC and in government, but to each and every single one of us. Dr. King said that there was a conversation and a question between a priest and a Levite. And they walked by someone who was in need, and they said, what will happen to me if I stop to help him? And then there was a good Samaritan that reversed that question on them and said, if I don't stop to help him, what would happen to him? And so when you look at issues like homelessness, look at the face of homelessness. In the city of New York, almost 60,000 homeless every night. 24,000 are children. 14,500 families have at least one income. And yes, government, and yes, we all have to do more. But the question becomes, what are we all doing? Because quite often, Reverend Sharpton, so many people who point the finger at government as it pertains to the issue of homelessness and say, you got to do something and we all have to do something, are the first ones to say that while they go to church, they go to a mosque, they go to a house of worship, they'll say we got to be our brothers and our sisters' keeper, but don't put that shelter where I live. And so we have to look at each other. We have to say, in the spirit of Dr. King, yes, we're going to speak truth to power, but we all have to do it together. And we all have to carry on that legacy. We all have to be our brothers and our sisters' keeper. Thank you. Happy King Day and God bless.
As Club President Diaz brought up Vieques, many of you remember we all united and fought against the Navy bombing then, formed a huge coalition. And I believed in that, supported Freddie Ferrer that year for mayor. And I tell you, Tish James, that we went down and sat in Vieques. Roberto Ramirez and two others and I had Adolfo Carrion. But when we got to court, they got 40 days in jail. I got 90 days in jail. About 2 weeks in jail, my same friend, Congressman Rangel, came by and saw me. He says, how many days did they get? I said, 40. He said, you got how many? I said, 90. He said, how do you feel about this coalition thing now? We better renegotiate this. I like to pick on Congressman Reagan because he's good-natured about this. Let us hear from the borough president of Manhattan, since we are in her borough, Gail Brewer.
Thank you very much, Reverend Sharpton, and thank you, Keisha Foy. The words of Dr. King that I like best are, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. And that's what's so good about being here at NAN today. Because I've been here when you had the discussion of HIV, not today. I've been here because you're going to focus on technology and get rid of that goddamn digital divide. And I've been here when the other day we had a discussion because after President Obama spoke, it was great to be here to share that speech with all of you. And I say all of this because there's a lot of work to be done. We can talk about the pipeline, we can talk about the great Black Lives Matter movement, we can talk about the tragic murders in Charleston. but you need to have the kind of support and collegiality that goes on here at NAN. And I want to thank you for that, because you are unique, you are special, and you are the place to be. I want to also thank my colleagues in the City Council, because with my support this year, we passed the Fair Chance Act. And what that says is, as of October 27 of 2015, you have no longer that box to check off if you have a record. It is one application, it is one place, and if you're qualified for that job, you get that job. That is a big difference in the city of New York. The second thing I want to say is I believe in young people. There's nobody better than this young man, but young people in general. So I hope you apply to the community boards. But let me tell you, we passed a law that says 16 and 17-year-olds can be on the community boards. They don't have to be 18, and we put them on, and some of them are better than the others. Thank you very much. I want to look forward to working with you on all the issues that we all care about. Thank you very much.
Let us hear now from the congressman from Harlem, Senior, the Dean of the Congressional Caucus from New York, and one of the leaders of the Congressional Black Caucus. Last night hosted the presidential debate of the Democratic Party in Charleston. You saw him sitting there, Congressman Charles Raymond.
At 6 a.m., as Reverend Sharpton said, I was in Charlotte, South Carolina, with Hillary Clinton and members of the Congressional Black Caucus as they embarked to celebrate the birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King. They said, Rango, why are you so anxious to get back to Harlem? I said, only because Charlotte didn't send me to the Congress. I had to be back home. But I'm telling you, God is so good. Because wherever you can go, you can see the message that we should be thanking God for the blessings we have. But my God, He's removed the veil from our eyes to see the injustices that are taking place and what we have to do for ourselves and for our children. You know, we are not going to find people like Dr. Martin Luther King that are willing to put their lives out in order to improve the quality of life for the humankind. But in each one of us, it has to be just this much. In each and every one that are here, if you could see the size of this crowd inside and outside, if you could see what was happening in Charleston, and no matter how good or how bad you felt about the time and what Dr. Martin Luther King had done, more slaves were imported from Africa to Charleston than any part of this country. And you see these massive colonial houses that still exist because Sherman didn't get around to it. But you also see the shelters that Africans had to live in as animals. When you look at the economy of the United States and find out in 300 years we've become the world power, so many people refuse to recognize that without slave labor, without the deaths of all those people, without cotton, there would be no United States of America. So when you find a Dr. Martin Luther King who says to Catholics, to Protestants, to Jews, to Muslims, that God didn't intend for it to be that way, then it means on this one day we can look at each other and be able to say that God is not asking us to put our life on the line. But He's not asking us to give up on those people that just because of their color stand a worse chance of getting shot down in the street, a better chance of ending up in jail, being poor, having disparity, losing hope and ambitions to becoming what can happen in this world. So God has blessed each one of us in bringing us to slavery from where we are. But the mountaintop that we can see has to be one that we can get in the United States of America. So when people start saying that if you're Muslim, if you're Catholic, if you're Jewish, or if you're Gentile, you can't be president, you can bet your sweet life we're on that list. And so we have to be together, fight together, pray together, and thank God all of you are really strong enough to make us all collectively strong enough to do something about it. God bless.
When I was 13, I became youth director of Operation Breadbasket, founded by Dr. King. Been in the movement ever since. I was appointed by nationally Reverend Jesse Jackson and locally by Reverend William Jones, who ended up being my pastor and baptized me a Baptist. I'm honored that I've now been able to work with his daughter, who heads one of the largest social service agencies in the city. And she chairs the 25th anniversary year of National Action Network. Our convention will be April 13th through 16th. That has been chaired by the granddaughter of Percy Sutton. Stand up, Keisha Sutton James. I would like you to hear some words, though, from our own Jennifer. Before I bring on the next speaker, I want you to know Manhattan DA Cyrus Vance had to leave because someone broke out of jail, but he's up here. Assemblyman Keith Wright broke out. He was in jail with 32 BJs. He just left jail fighting for airport workers. Vance went downtown, he crossed this town. And I want to acknowledge him. Senator Espiat is here. Give him a hand. Mr. Linares is here. Give him a hand. I'm trying to be fair. Anybody else running I don't know nothing about? All right. Many times you take risk in life that would be misunderstood. But sometimes you do what you think is right. I supported someone that I thought was right, because if it was standing on corners with us fighting crime for Occupy the Corner, he was there. If it was marching against stop and frisk, he was there. If it was going to jail about hospital in Brooklyn, he was there. He has a track record that we believed in. I do not believe in folk that show up when they want you to support them, but don't show up when you need them to support the cause. He was always there for us. We were there for him. He's began to turn this city around, whether it's pre-K, 68,000, whether it's livable wage, whether it's bringing down stop and frisk, as well as crime. Let us welcome the mayor of the city of New York, Bill de Blasio.
I want to thank everyone who's here, because everybody who's here is living in the vision of Dr. King, extending the beliefs of Dr. King, bringing into 2015 everything he fought for up to 1968. His spirit is right here in this room. He would love this gathering of people. He would see kindred souls fighting to continue his movement. And I have to tell you, of all the people I've known in this extraordinary city, I literally don't know anyone who has invoked Dr. King's legacy more often in the way he thinks, who has talked about Dr. King's strategic insight more, who has told us to remember the lessons of Dr. King. No one has done that more than Reverend Al Sharpton. When he talks about his experiences as a young man, learning the lessons of nonviolence, learning the lessons of community organizing, learning the lessons of how to push the spectrum and change the debate, that has been what's fueled Reverend Sharpton and the National Action Network throughout. And my friends, do not forget, in his day, the man we celebrate today, the man who's got a statue in Washington and so many other honors, in his day he was vilified regularly by the American mainstream. Let's not airbrush history. And so we remember Dr. King in his fullness. We remember the whole man, the man who fought against the grain, who changed the way we think, who risked, who put his body on the line. That's the man that we remember. So I honor everyone who's here today. I thank all the elected officials who are here today, everyone who wants to take that spirit, that history, and continue to give it life. Now, if Dr. King were here, again, I think a different country it would be if we had not lost Dr. King. We lost one of the greatest leaders we ever had. But Dr. King, I think if you're here today, would reflect upon all of the movements, all of the energy of today, he would see something kindred. But the first thing I think he would say to us is, what happened over all those years since 1968? I don't think he would have any lack of love for us, but I think he would call us to account. I think he would say, what happened? How on earth is the Voting Rights Act under attack in New York and all over the nation today? I think he'd say, how on earth did we have a moment where the Supreme Court of the United States may actually roll back and diminish the rights of labor unions that Dr. King fought for. He died in Memphis defending working people and labor unions. He would say, what happened? How is the economic condition of African Americans actually in some ways even worse today than it was in 1968? The disparities, education, mass incarceration. Dr. King, if he were standing here, we would feel so blessed. But some of what he'd tell us would not be comforting. But now there's a good side too. And I'll be quick. But I want to say three very easy things. There were three areas Dr. King focused on. Conventional history focuses on the civil rights element of his work. Remember, he moved increasingly towards the question of economic rights. And he moved towards the question of whether we belonged in wars that did no good and led to the loss of so many young Americans, particularly young men of color. So very quickly, civil rights today. Dr. King would find some favor, I believe, in the fact that in this city we're showing, yes, as Rev said, you can become a safer city and a fairer city simultaneously. Crime is down and stop and frisk is down 93% in this city. And that Father's Day march, I bet a lot of people in this room were a part of it a few years ago. What was more indicative of Dr. King's tradition than that Father's Day march that rocked this city, that silent, peaceful march that changed this city forever? Dr. King would celebrate Black Lives Matter. He would celebrate the movement against mass incarceration. He would see that there is a part of the civil rights movement that has deepened and is strong and is taking a fullness that can really change this country to the core. On economic rights, he would certainly smile on the fact that in this city, and increasingly all over this country, we're talking about $15 an hour as a base level minimum wage that people need to survive. We used to hear $15 an hour was impossible. Today, all over this country, because of an extraordinary movement, everyone's talking about $15 an hour. He would believe in things we're doing in this city, like paid sick leave for the people of the city, paid parental leave for the people who work for the city. He would believe in efforts to create affordable housing, because affordable housing is something everyone deserves. Lord knows he would believe in pre-K for every one of our children, full day pre-K for free, because you cannot uplift our society if we don't first give our children the education they deserve. So on economic rights, a long, long way to go, but in this year and last year, 2015, 2016, finally we're talking about income inequality the way Dr. King would have us talk about it. It's on the front page. It's being acknowledged. You saw today the report from Oxfam. The 62 richest people on the earth have as much income as the 4 billion poorest people on the earth. Dr. King knew what was wrong then, but at least now it's being talked about and it's creating the anger, the frustration, the movement, the change that fits the exact same thing Dr. King was doing at the end of his life with the Poor People's Campaign. Finally, we all know the great and powerful phrase, study war no more. Dr. King would appreciate what happened last week. The President of the United States of America. The President of the United States of America. By the way, a black man. From that podium in the Congress during the State of the Union address saying, this nation must learn the lessons of the Vietnam War. What a tribute, in effect, to Dr. King, who died fighting against that unjust and mistaken war. And to hear Barack Obama, the man who got us out of the quagmire of Iraq, talk about the fact that now we aren't going to send our young men and women off to endless and fruitless conflicts. And if we're ever going to get engaged anywhere, guess what? The Congress of the United States is going to have to actually vote on it. Right. That was, in a different way, a tribute to Dr. King and what he taught us. So I conclude with this. We just left an extraordinary year, 2015, where so many issues came to the fore. The distance between 2014 and 2015 in terms of what was actually being talked about in this country was breathtaking. Black Lives Matter came to the fore. Mass incarceration came to the fore. $15 minimum wage came to the fore. Income inequality came to the fore. Now, 2016, a year of decision for all of us. We, all of us, have to bring those issues even more to the fore, because that's the only way we make change. Change comes from the grassroots. It's not a top-down affair. It is a people thing. It is a grassroots-up reality. Dr. King understood that. We're in a great year of decision. And then 2 years later, 2018 is the 50th anniversary of the loss of Dr. King. I conclude by saying, let's take on a mandate, everyone in this room. Let's not walk to that anniversary. Let us race with all we have to the 50th anniversary, and on that day in 2018 when we stand here, let's show that we actually changed this nation and bent that arc towards justice, towards economic fairness, towards a nation that actually includes its people. In these next years, we can do the kinds of things Dr. King believed were possible. It's our time to do them. Thank you, brothers and sisters. God bless you.
Mayor Bill de Blasio. One of the things that has most struck me about the year, he said, when I got the call from Eric Garner's family, then the call in Ferguson, I went and dealt with Michael Brown's family, and on and on. They did not just want rhetoric. They wanted justice. They wanted fairness. One person that gave a national model for fairness, that stood up at a time when others said, what are we going to do, was we have in the state of New York the only special prosecutor on policing given by the governor of this state, and challenged governors everywhere to do it. He worked with the mothers of police brutality victims. And it is for that reason that I can go around this country and say, use the model of New York. We cannot have local prosecutors do politics. We want fair and impartial investigations. And across the board, whether it was special prosecutor whether it was wages. He has set a national model. And the strongest gun laws and civil unions turning into marriage in this state. A lot of folks arguing about who somebody's going to marry. You worry about who you going to marry. People have the right to marry and have the right to live by their decisions. He made that happen. The mothers and National Action Network and others worked with him on this special prosecutor. The National Urban League honored him for the special prosecutor national model. But today the mothers, Mrs. Diallo, Mrs. Carr, Mrs. Bell, Mrs. Barr, and led by Mrs. Baez, come as our regional director brings this. We condemn you when you're wrong, but we have to salute when you have done a national model. And Governor Cuomo has been the only national model on what to do about this. Give a hand, Governor Andrew Cuomo.
Governor Cuomo, the National Action Network, and the mothers of the victims of police violence present to you the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Crusader for Social Justice Award, presented this day to Governor Andrew M. Cuomo by the National Action Network, Reverend Dr. Al Sharpton, President, January 18, 2016.
Mrs. Baez speaking for the mother.
David. Thank you for letting us come here. On this day, we want to say thank you and welcome for the special prosecutor and welcome to Martin Luther King Day. What a day to be remembered that we, the mothers, want justice and we won't take nothing less than justice. So don't forget that we still watch you. That's what he's supposed to do. You're the boss, but we watching you.
All right. Give them a hand. Let us hear. Let us hear from the governor. Then we're gonna line up and march. I don't want nobody. This was not about who showed up rally. We marching, and the governor's gonna kick off the march with us. Because 15 hours an hour is what we want. But we wholeheartedly, I raised this morning, Governor, at National Action Network's Washington breakfast. Attorney General was there, the former Attorney General, that what you've done is a national model, and we need to have it made national law. It starts with one example. And as Ms. Baez said, we're watching you, but we saw you do that. And you always have said to me, Al, I'll tell you yes or no, and you tell me whether you are with me or not. And when it comes to what you've done and the things I've cited, we're glad to welcome you again to the microphone at the House of Justice.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It is my pleasure to be here first to Reverend Sharpton, who I've been with for many, many years. Sometimes we agree, sometimes we disagree. He's getting younger, by the way. Every year, I don't know what it is. I come here, I'm getting older, and he's getting younger. But he like that. Yeah. It's the first time he's agreed with me in 10 years. He has always been a voice for justice and a voice for the people. Let's give him a round of applause, Reverend Sharpton. I want to applaud the mothers who went through one of the greatest pains of losing a child, losing a loved one. But rather than taking that energy and making it negative, they took that energy and they made it positive, and they became advocates and crusaders for justice. And they got justice. not just for their families, but for families all across the state. It wouldn't have happened without the mothers. Let's give them a round of applause. For Hazel Dukes and the NAACP and Congressman Charles Rangel and Leticia James and Senator Kevin Parker and all my colleagues who are here, I wish them happy Martin Luther King Day. Mayor de Blasio just spoke. My best wishes to him. And we have to go out and march. And it's not that I'm trying to stall, because it's not that cold. It's really not that cold. Maybe not that cold for you. It's very cold for me. But 3 quick points. Number 1, Reverend Dr. King was about one thing. And that fact was action. Action. We tend to think of Dr. King as such a beautiful speaker and a man of words. He was a man of words, but more, he was a man of action. He was a man of product. He was a man who was saying, get things done. One of his great quotes that I love, human progress is neither automatic nor inevitable. Every step towards the goal of justice requires sacrifice, suffering, and struggle. The tireless exertions and passionate concern of dedicated individuals. Work for action, work for justice, but get it done. We got justice for the mothers. We did something. We appointed the first special prosecutor in this state and a model for the nation. And that's what Dr. King was talking to us about. Actually making progress. I often think if Dr. King came and was here today, what would he say? And I think he would say in some areas we've made great progress. African American president. Bet you that was hard to believe 50 years ago. More elected officials. Changes in the laws. But I think he'd also be quick to point out the areas where we haven't made progress. The area of criminal justice and the area of economic justice would rise to the top. Criminal justice, we are in the same unhealthy, unproductive cycle over and over and over. We don't understand enough to invest in young people before problems present, but then we waste so much money once we have a problem and we send people to prison or drug rehab or whatever it is. We have to change that cycle. And Dr. King's point was action, make it happen. We proposed an agenda this year in Albany that my colleagues are going to fight for all across this state that takes that philosophy and turns it 180 degrees. We call it the right priorities philosophy that says stop spending $50,000 a prison cell. That it is madness to put 2.2 million Americans behind bars. 2.2 million. Maybe it's getting better. No, it's getting worse. A 500% increase in 30 years. Think about that, a 500% increase. 77,000 people in this state behind bars. That has to stop. And we have to have the intelligence to say, let's invest in the front end of the system. Let's go to those schools that are failing, that happen to be in poor communities all across the state. And let's say we're not going to allow those schools to fail anymore. And let's acknowledge the mistake that we've made decade after decade after decade. In those schools, the problem isn't just education. It's not just about a teacher. You're fighting poverty. You're fighting discrimination. You're fighting issues of nutrition. You're fighting for kids who need help after school. You need schools that are open in the evening with midnight basketball and recreation. That's what you need in those schools. Give them the right education early on so you're not paying for a prison cell later on. That's what this is about. It's not enough to say to a young person, it's not enough to say to a 16-year-old, stay off the street corner. When you have a society that is better at getting them him a jail cell than a job interview. Where is the opportunity for that person? Where is the job for that person? We started a program 2 years ago that's working phenomenally well, where we go to a private sector employer and we subsidize the salary, and the young person also gets training, apprenticeship in that job. It costs us money, but you know what? It costs us 1/10 of what a prison cell would cost us. And that's the opportunity we're talking about. We want to invest $50 million this year to give hope and opportunity for our young people, now 40% unemployed. We put forth an agenda that says don't be so quick to lock people up. Alternatives to incarceration, give them a second chance, give them drug rehab, give them training, but keep them out of a prison. And for those who happen to go to prison, change the experience in prison. Just to lock a person in a cell and let them out 10 years later and think they're going to be the better for it is insanity. Let's at least use that time and that money to teach and give skills and job readiness, so when they come out, they can re-enter society and do something. That is our agenda on criminal justice. And it will take this nation's agenda and flip it on its head. And then the second issue, as you've been hearing about all day, is economic justice. Reverend Dr. King would say we have gone backwards. Highest income inequality in the nation is today, not in the 60s. And work does not pay a decent wage so you can live and support your family in any kind of decency, and that's the word decency. Remember this, FDR passed the minimum wage law. He was former governor of New York, became president. What the minimum wage law said was, you should be able to earn a decent living. $18,000 a year in New York City, you cannot earn a decent living. You can't pay for food and apartment and clothing for $18,000. A lot of these companies pay a minimum wage to the worker, but when you pay a minimum wage to the worker, you're still below poverty in this state. So then the taxpayers give food stamps, welfare, average cost $6,800 per person. So you have the corporation paying $18,000, the taxpayer paying $6,800. You want to talk about corporate welfare and a subsidy to the largest corporations in this country on the back of the taxpayer, that's it. And you want to talk about a lack of fairness. If you went to the 70s, late 60s, and you took the minimum wage and you just indexed it for inflation, that's all. Just index it for inflation. You know where you wind up today? Our proposal, $15. That's where you wind up. That means for 40 years, poor families have been going backwards, and working families have been going backwards. And it's not just that you feel like you're going backwards. You're not going crazy. You are going backwards. That's what this economic system has done. And that's why we proposed $15 statewide, the highest minimum wage in the nation. And I am proud to fight for it. Let New York lead the way and say, you want economic justice, pay people what they deserve and pay people with respect. And I will end where we started. Dr. King always said, it's not about words. It's not about saying the right thing. It's about doing the right thing. It's about getting it done, making a difference in people's lives. That's what we're going to do in Albany. That's what we're marching for on that street today. Not to make a point, not to advocate, but to tell our elected officials, you passed $15 and you passed it this year, or we're going to remember you didn't. Happy Martin Luther King Day. There is no better honor for Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King than economic justice in this state. Amen.
me say this. As the governor and I prepare, I want to acknowledge some people that we have not heard from, but I want to acknowledge them. The head of the New York State NAACP, Hazel Dukes, give her a hand. Adonis Rodriguez, our councilman. Vanessa Gibson, Assemblyman Inez Dickens, our councilwoman. Kevin Park, our state senator. Marco Presco, Assemblyman Nick Perry. Michael Blake. We're going to be led. Norman Seabrooks, I see in the house. We're going to be led by George Gresham of 1199. Wait a minute, just a minute. Shh. We're all going to leave together. Y'all hold that. Charlie King has been asked to put together a broad-based commission and model for how to get this done. This will have the same national import that the special prosecutor announcement did. Charlie, would you explain this and who is in it?
Real quickly, because I know everything has been said, it just has not been said by me. But I want to just quickly tell you that the governor's agenda that he laid out today, he laid out in the State of the State, and that we know that Speaker Hasty and many of the members of the Assembly support. We need to do what Martin Luther King has proposed, is that we need to act on the outside, and we're starting a committee that we're announcing today.
The day when George Bush left the White House, we losing almost 800,000 jobs a month.
Right up here. I'm going to stay on too. Guys, back up. You ready, brother? He got something for you. Like CD with Dr. King. Excellent. I did a recording with Dr. King. He got it for you. Thank you, brother. All right. Now, good.
All right. Go ahead. Ready? Yellow, come on. Let's go. They're not going anywhere until you move back.
Guys, a little guys, at least 10 feet back. 10 feet back. 10 feet back. Guys, 10 feet back. 10 feet back, guys. You gotta get but the thing is, we need space here.
Everyone else, go in front of them. Please go in front of them.
Guys, get the roll front. Get the roll front of the picture. Wait. Get your shot. Get your shots, guys. Guys, get the rope out of the way. Rope out of the way. Looks like they're in prison. Guys, put the rope on the ground. Put part on the ground. Don't we understand? Okay, guys. Let's move on. Let's move on. Let's go.
okay?
Just move it a little bit. Move inside. Move inside.
Talked about how this was an issue that brought everybody together. I think if there's one thing that we can now say is on Martin Luther King Day, even those that may disagree on one or two points politically or tactically, whether it be powerful men or people that are not powerful, that we can come together. It's a wonderful testimony to Dr. King that he could bring everybody together.
That's right. That's right. Thank you. And we're standing also for an end to violence in our communities.
We talked about how this was an issue that brought everybody together. I think if there's one thing that we can now say is on Martin Luther King Day, even those that may disagree on one or two points politically or tactically, whether it be powerful men or people that are not powerful, that we can come together. It's a wonderful testimony to Dr. King that he could bring everybody together.
That's right. That's right. Thank you. And we're standing also for an end to violence in our communities.
Hey, Jen. Sorry.